The punch landed just as the doctor announced the ninth girl. My body was a battlefield, torn and bleeding from the miracle of bringing 9 souls into the world. But the sharp, explosive pain on my jaw was a different kind of wound. It was a wound of pure hatred. NMY husband, Julian, stood over me, his handsome face twisted into something unrecognizable. His knuckles were red. My vision swam, the bright, sterile lights of the delivery room blurring into a halo around his monstrous form. The cries of my 9 newborn daughters, a sound that should have been the most beautiful symphony, were drowned out by the ringing in my ears. "You failed," he breathed, the words colder than any winter. "You failed my family. You failed our name." And I tasted blood, my own. I tried to push myself up, to look towards the chorus of tiny wails, to see the daughters I had fought for, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed by exhaustion and shock. A nurse rushed forward, her face a mask of horror, but Julian shot her a look so venomous she froze in her tracks. NHE didn't see 9 miracles. He saw 9 disappointments, 9 insults to his legacy. He looked at me, lying broken on that bed, and he felt nothing but contempt. NMY daughters saw their first day without a father. Because in that moment, the man I had married, the man I had loved, ceased to exist. He had drawn a line, not with words, but with his fist. And as I lay there, a silent promise formed in the deepest, most protected part of my soul. He thought he had ended me. He had no idea he had just created his own executioner. If you believe that no woman should ever endure this, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps share stories that need to be told. Now, let me tell you how I made him pay for every last tear. Section 1, The Promise of a Dynasty. When I married Julien Delacroix, I married into a dynasty. His family wasn't just wealthy. They were practically aristocracy, with a lineage they traced back for centuries. Their name was their religion, and legacy was its gospel. Julien was the heir apparent, a man groomed from birth to carry the weight of his ancestors' expectations. He was devastatingly handsome, impossibly charming, and he pursued me with a single-minded focus that I mistook for romantic passion. And I was an art historian, fascinated by the stories behind beautiful things. To Julien, I was another beautiful thing to be acquired, the perfect, well-educated, gentle wife who would produce the next generation of Delacroix men. He spoke of our future sons as if they were already a certainty. "They will have your eyes," he'd say, "and my ambition." And our wedding was a national event, a spectacle of wealth and power. I was dizzy with happiness, blind to the fact that I wasn't just marrying a man. I was signing a contract. The terms of that contract became clear after our first year together. When I joyfully announced I was pregnant, Julian's first question wasn't about my health or my happiness. It was, "Have you had the tests?" To determine the gender, when our first daughter, Isabel, was born, the family's reaction was polite but cool. She was beautiful, but she was not the heir. Julian's mother, a formidable matriarch named Genevieve, looked at the baby in my arms and said, "Well, the first is often a practice run. The next must be a boy." NTHE pressure was immense and suffocating. I was living in their ancestral mansion, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. Every portrait on the wall was of a Delacroix man, their stern eyes following me, judging me. My life became a series of doctor's appointments, fertility charts, and hushed, anxious conversations. With each subsequent daughter, 2, 3, then 4, the disappointment in the house grew thicker. Julian's charm curdled into impatience. The grand, romantic gestures were replaced by cold silences and cutting remarks. He started spending more time at his clubs, at business dinners that lasted until dawn. He was distancing himself from his growing family of failures. NMY girls were my entire world. They were bright, funny, and full of life, little sparks of light in the oppressive gloom of that mansion. But to the Delacroix dynasty, they were invisible. They were not part of the line, they didn't count, and I tried to shield them from it, creating a loving bubble for them in the nursery wing of the house. But I knew they felt it. They saw the way their father and grandmother looked right through them. They felt like ghosts in their own home. When I discovered I was pregnant for the 5th time, the news was met not with joy, but with a grim sense of finality. This was my last chance. The doctors were stunned by the ultrasound. 9 heartbeats. A medical anomaly. A miracle. NBUT, to Julian and his mother, it was a statistical certainty. 9 chances, Julian had said, his eyes gleaming with a cold, possessive light. The Delacroix line will finally have its heir. NTHE pregnancy was brutal. I was confined to a private hospital wing for the final 4 months, my body a vessel for their dynastic ambitions. Julian visited daily, not to comfort me, but to monitor his investment. He never asked about my pain or my fear. He only spoke of the son who was to be born, the celebrations that would be held, the legacy that would be secured. NTHE delivery was a terrifying, high-stakes ordeal. A team of 24 doctors and nurses worked for hours. One by one, my daughters were born, their cries filling the room. 1, 2, 3, all girls. 4, 5, 6, still girls. With each announcement, I could feel the temperature in the room drop. I could see the hope on Julian's face souring into disbelief, then into pure, unadulterated rage. When the doctor finally said, 9 healthy baby girls, congratulations, the room was silent, save for the cries of my children. I turned my head, my body screaming in agony, and looked at my husband. And that's when he struck me. That's when he declared me, and the 9 miracles I had just created, a failure. Section 2, the Fortress of Silence NTHE punch, was a beginning. It shattered the last illusion of the man I thought I knew. In the days that followed, the Delacroix machine moved with chilling efficiency. I wasn't just a disappointment. I was a scandal to be managed. And I was moved, under the cover of darkness, from the pristine hospital to a secluded, high-walled estate in a remote part of the country I'd never even heard of. It was a beautiful property, with manicured gardens and breathtaking views, but it was a prison. The staff were not servants. They were guards, handpicked by Julian's mother, Genevieve. They were polite, silent, and their eyes were always on me. NMY 9 daughters were with me, each in her own ornate crib, tended to by a team of stone-faced nannies. Their names, which I had whispered to them in the hospital, Amelia, Beatrice, Clara, Diana, Eleanor, Fiona, Grace, Hazel, and Isabel, felt like a secret rebellion. They were not the Delacroix heir. They were my daughters. Julian never came. Genevieve came once. She swept into the nursery, a figure of icy elegance, and looked at the row of cribs with disdain. She didn't ask to hold any of them. "You have brought shame upon this family, Alara," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You had one duty. Julian will, of course, begin divorce proceedings. You will be given a modest, confidential settlement, provided you remain here, in silence, and never attempt to contact us or tarnish the family name." NSHE looked at me, expecting me to crumble, to beg. I met her gaze, the throbbing in my jaw a constant reminder of my new reality. I said nothing. My silence unnerved her. She hadn't expected defiance, even passive defiance. She left, and I never saw her again. They thought they had buried me. They thought I would wither away in my luxurious prison, a forgotten secret. They underestimated the power of a mother with nothing left to lose. NMY body healed slowly, but my mind sharpened. The pain and humiliation forged a core of steel within me. I played the part of the broken woman perfectly. I was quiet, listless, and compliant. I let the guards report back to Genevieve that I was no threat. NBUT at night, my real work began. This estate, like all Delacroix properties, had a library. It was Julian's grandfather's collection, a vast trove of books on history, economics, and, most importantly, corporate law and finance. The Delacroix dynasty was built not just on land and titles, but on a complex, labyrinthine structure of corporations, trusts, and offshore holdings. Night after night, I slipped into that silent, dusty room. With a baby monitor on the table beside me, I devoured those books. I taught myself how to read a balance sheet, how to understand trust law, how to follow the scent of hidden money. I learned that the family's power was a carefully constructed illusion, a house of cards built on legal loopholes and hidden debts. And I was going to find the single card that, when pulled, would bring the whole thing down. NMY only connection to the outside world was a young gardener, a boy named Leo. He was kind and didn't have the same fearful reverence for the Delacroix name as the other staff. He would sometimes leave a wildflower on my windowsill. I saw in him a flicker of humanity. I took a risk. I wrote a note, a simple plea for help, and left it for him with one of the flowers. The next day, he left a small, untraceable burner phone hidden in a potted plant. It was my first weapon, my lifeline, the key to unlocking my cage. The Delacroix dynasty thought they had silenced me, but they had only given me the quiet I needed to plan their destruction. Assembling the army NFOR 3 years, I lived a life of quiet deception. By day, I was a ghost, drifting through the gardens, raising my 9 daughters in near total isolation. They were my sun, my moon, my entire universe. I poured all my energy into them, teaching them to be kind, to be curious, and to be strong. They grew into 9 distinct, brilliant little girls, a secret society of sisters in our fortress of solitude. NBY night, I was a warrior. With my burner phone and the knowledge gleaned from the library, I began to reach out. I didn't look for a typical divorce lawyer. I looked for a giant killer. My research led me to a man named Marcus Thorne, a legendary litigator known for his scorched earth tactics against the super-rich. He was brilliant, ruthless, and had a personal vendetta against old money dynasties like the Delacroix. NMY first call to him was a gamble. I had no money, no proof outside of my own head. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice low and steady. "My name is Elara Delacroix. My husband is Julien Delacroix. I have 9 daughters he has never met, and I have information that can dismantle his family's entire financial empire. I can't pay you, but I can give you the one thing I know you want, the head of the Delacroix dynasty on a platter." There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "That's a bold claim from a woman calling on a burner phone," he finally said. "The Delacroix family is a fortress, and I've been living inside it," I replied. "I know where all the cracks are," and I spent the next hour detailing what I had learned. The shell corporations, the tax shelters in Liechtenstein, the fraudulent asset transfers designed to hide the family's true wealth. I spoke with the precision of a scholar and the conviction of a woman wronged. NBY, the end of the call, Thorne's tone had changed. "Get me proof," he said, a new hunger in his voice. "One concrete piece of evidence to corroborate your claims, and I will burn them to the ground for you." Getting that proof was the most dangerous part of my plan. The estate's finances were managed remotely, but I had discovered that the original trust documents for the entire Delacroix fortune were kept in a climate-controlled safe in the library. It was a relic, a symbol of the patriarch's power, and I needed help. I confided in Leo, the young gardener. I told him a sanitized version of the truth, that my husband's family was trying to take my children, and I needed documents to protect them. Seeing the love I had for my girls, he agreed to help. And one night, while the guards were changing shifts, Leo disabled the silent alarm to the library for exactly 5 minutes. It was all the time I had. My heart hammered against my ribs as I worked the combination to the safe, a combination I had figured out from the old man's birthday and his favorite Bible verse, details I'd found in his personal journals. And inside, I found it. The original Delacroix family trust document. I photographed every page with my burner phone. The document was a masterpiece of legal deception, but it had one fatal flaw, an archaic clause that, if exploited, could challenge the very legitimacy of Julian's control over the fortune. And I sent the photos to Marcus Thorne. His reply came 2 hours later. It was a single word: checkmate. The declaration of war in WE didn't serve the papers quietly. Marcus Thorne believed in spectacle. He believed that justice for the powerless required shining the brightest possible light on the crimes of the powerful. NTHE Delacroix family hosted an annual legacy ball a self-congratulatory event where they would announce a large donation to the city's art museum. It was the height of their social calendar, a performance of benevolence. Julian was on the podium, speaking about tradition and family honor, his mother Genevieve watching from the front row like a queen. And at the precise moment Julian announced the donation, every screen in the grand ballroom, which should have shown a video tribute to his family, flickered. They went black for a second, and then a new image appeared. It was a high-resolution photograph of my face, taken the day after the assault, my jaw swollen and bruised, my eyes hollow. Underneath it, a simple line of text, "The Delacroix Legacy." A tidal wave of shock and horror swept through the room. Before anyone could react, a team of process servers, led by Marcus Thorne himself, moved through the crowd. They served Julian. They served Genevieve. They served every member of the Delacroix board present. The papers weren't just for divorce. They were for assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a massive civil lawsuit challenging the control of the entire Delacroix Trust. It was a declaration of war. NTHE family's PR machine went into overdrive denouncing the slanderous and desperate stunt. They painted me as a vindictive, mentally unstable woman, lashing out after a mutually agreed-upon separation. NBUT Thorne was ready. He didn't just fight them in the court of law, he fought them in the court of public opinion. He leaked the first document, the sworn testimony of the delivery room nurse who had witnessed the assault. She had quit her job shortly after, haunted by what she saw, and had been waiting for a chance to speak. Next, he leaked evidence of the exile. He provided the media with satellite images of the remote estate, contracts for the security staff, and a statement from a former nanny who confirmed that Julian had never once set foot on the property to see his 9 daughters. NTHE narrative began to shift. I was no longer the crazy wife. I was the exiled mother. The story was irresistible. The powerful dynasty, the 9 baby girls, the mother hidden away. Public sympathy, a force the Delacroix family had never had to contend with, began to turn against them like a tide. From my prison, I watched the news reports on a small tablet Leo had smuggled in. I saw Julian's face, pale and shaken, as reporters hounded him on the courthouse steps. I saw the cracks forming in the fortress. Genevieve tried to fight back with her most powerful weapon, money. She cut off all funds to the estate, assuming I would be left in the dark, unable to feed my children or pay the staff, who were now effectively my jailers. It was a foolish move. Thorne had anticipated it. He filed an emergency petition, and a judge, outraged by the evidence, ordered the Delacroix Trust to pay me a temporary alimony so substantial it made Genevieve's eyes water. He also placed a lien on all major family assets, effectively freezing their wealth. The Queen was in check, and her kingdom was beginning to crumble. Section 5, the battle for a name NTHE custody battle, was the heart of the war. For the Delacroix family, it was never about the children. It was about control and public image. Their legal strategy was to prove I was an unfit mother, a mentally fragile woman, incapable of raising 9 children, let alone managing the vast fortune they feared I might get my hands on. They brought in a parade of expensive psychiatrists who, without ever meeting me, testified that my delusions about the family's persecution made me a danger to my daughters. They argued that the children should be made wards of the state, to be managed by a neutral third party, one they would undoubtedly control. It was my turn to take the stand. When I walked into that courtroom, it was the first time I had left the estate in 3 years. I felt the sun on my skin, a stranger to its warmth. I saw Julian and Genevieve across the room, their faces masks of cold hatred. Their lawyer came at me with everything he had, trying to paint me as a gold digger, a liar, and hysteric. But I was no longer the timid girl they had exiled. I was a woman forged in fire. I answered every question with calm, unshakable clarity. NTHE turning point came during Marcus Thorne's questioning. "Mrs. Delacroix," he began, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "The defense claims you are an unfit mother. Could you please tell the court the names of your 9 daughters?" And I looked directly at the judge, a stern-faced woman who had been watching me intently, and I began. Amelia, my oldest by 7 minutes, who loves to draw. Beatrice, who is fearless and climbs everything. Clara, who is quiet and observant. Diana, who is the leader of their little pack. Eleanor, who has the most infectious laugh. Fiona, who is stubborn and incredibly determined. Grace, who is the peacemaker. Hazel, who is a dreamer and tells the most wonderful stories. And Isabel, my youngest, who is the most affectionate soul I have ever known. And I didn't just list their names. I gave each one a life, a personality. The courtroom was spellbound. Then Thorne turned his attention to Julian. "Mr. Delacroix, your turn. Please, name your daughters for the court." Julian stood up, arrogant and dismissive. "That's what we have staff for. Their names are irrelevant. They are not the heir." And a gasp went through the courtroom. It was a fatal, unforced error. He had just admitted in open court that he saw his own children as worthless. The judge's pen scratched furiously on her notepad. NBUT Thorne wasn't done. He called his final witness, Leo, the gardener. The Delacroix lawyers scoffed, dismissing him as a disgruntled employee. But Leo spoke with simple, powerful honesty. He described how I cared for my children day in and day out, alone. He told the court he had never, in 3 years, seen Julian or any other family member visit the children. And then he delivered the final blow. He presented the court with a small, worn leather journal. It was mine. In it, I had documented every single day of my exile, every small milestone for my girls, every cruel instruction from the staff, every lonely night spent studying. It was the diary of a prisoner and the logbook of a loving mother. NTHE judge read a single page aloud, a page where I described teaching all 9 of my daughters how to say "I love you." NSHE closed the journal, took off her glasses, and looked at Julian with utter disdain. "Custody is awarded to the mother," she declared, her voice like the crack of a gavel, "solely and completely. And I had won my children. I had given them my name, and now I had saved them from his." Section 6. The fall of the House of Delacroix winning custody was the moral victory. The financial trial was the execution. Marcus Thorne took the information I had gathered and used it to systematically gut the Delacroix empire. NTHE fatal flaw I had discovered in the family trust was a clause written in the 1920s, stating that if the primary heir, Julian, was proven to be morally bankrupt or acting against the interest of the family's continuation, control of the trust could be challenged by a spouse on behalf of their children. It was an archaic, forgotten clause, but Thorne argued that Julian's assault, his abandonment of his 9 children, and his public admission of their worthlessness was the very definition of moral bankruptcy. NTHE court agreed. In a landmark ruling, the judge stripped Julian of his control over the family fortune, but the victory was even sweeter. Because the trust was established for the, quote, continuation of the Delacroix line, and because my 9 daughters were his only children, the court ruled that the assets of the trust were to be held for their benefit. My daughters, the 9 girls he had discarded, were now the heirs to the entire Delacroix fortune, and I, as their sole legal guardian, was appointed the trustee. NTHE irony was biblical. The man who had punched me for failing to produce an heir had just lost his entire inheritance to the 9 daughters he had refused to acknowledge. The woman he had exiled to a remote prison was now in control of his family's centuries-old dynasty. NTHE empire imploded. Stripped of his wealth and power, Julian was nothing. His business partners deserted him. The government, alerted by the evidence from our trial, launched a massive investigation into decades of tax evasion. Genevieve, the proud matriarch, was forced to sell the ancestral mansion to pay the family's legal debts. They were ruined, not just financially, but socially. The Delacroix name, once a symbol of power, was now a synonym for disgrace. And I never spoke to them again. I didn't need to. Their punishment was to live with the consequences of their own cruelty, to watch from the sidelines as the dynasty they worshipped was now controlled by the woman they had tried to destroy on behalf of the children they had abandoned. Section 7. A legacy of our Onei sold everything. The gloomy mansion, the offshore companies, the symbols of a corrupt and hollow legacy. I kept only enough to ensure that my daughters would have every opportunity in the world, that they would be secure for the rest of their lives. NTHE rest of the money, the vast majority of the Delacroix fortune, I used to create the Nine Muses Foundation. It's an organization dedicated to a single cause, providing legal and financial support to women and children trying to escape powerful, abusive men. We fund the giant killers, the Marcus Thorns of the world, for women who have nothing but a story and the courage to tell it. We turn victims into victors. NWE moved to a sun-drenched house by the sea. It's a home filled not with portraits of stern-faced men, but with my daughters, vibrant paintings, with the sound of their laughter, with the music they play, with the endless, chaotic, beautiful noise of a life well lived.